What's up, party people? This is a piece from The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, edited by Sean Matgamna. This particular piece is titled The New Russian Empire. I believe it was originally titled, it says here in a footnote, it was originally from the journal New International and it's originally from 1949. The piece is titled Stalinism and the Rise of the New Russian Empire. This is a Workers' Party. It says a Workers' Party document written by Draper. So, let's party. During the period since the end of the Second World War, Russia has emerged not only as a major imperialist power, but as one of the big two of the earth. Russia's imperialism has matured and expanded with a rapidity characteristic of change in our epoch. Beginning the war as Hitler's junior partner in the Stalin-Nazi pact, it is today capitalist America's only rival for world domination. A rivalry not only between different imperialisms, but also between two different systems of class exploitation, which meet each other with different political, social, and economic weapons in the struggle for the, quote, right, end quote, to oppress the peoples. Russia has not merely, quote, expanded, end quote. It is set out to build and has already acquired in part a far-flung empire on every side of its borders, consisting of states which are not merely, quote, satellites, end quote, but subject nations held in chains by the same totalitarian terror that operates within Russia itself. The euphemism of Russian, quote, expansionism, end quote, as a substitute for, quote, imperialism, end quote, can be used only if all reality is ignored. During the past 2 years, the unfolding of Stalinist policy, in the satellite states especially, has helped to confirm and clarify the nature of Russia and Stalinism. First and foremost among these developments has been the clear fact that the Stalinist regimes have without exception pursued a policy of bureaucratic nationalization of the economy and destruction of the capitalist class. In all the satellite states, the major part of industry has been nationalized. Whatever sector of the economy still remains in private hands is almost exclusively made up of small enterprises, and even these are rapidly on the way to complete nationalization or state control. The socioeconomic system, as well as the political system, has been made identical with that of Russia itself in every important respect. The bourgeoisie has been expropriated not only politically but economically. The event which marked this development most dramatically was the Communist Party coup in Czechoslovakia in February 1948, this being the last country in the Russian Empire in which the bourgeoisie had retained any vestige of political control. With this demonstration, the last props have been knocked from under the two theories of the, quote, Russian question, end quote, heretofore posed in the Marxist movement as alternatives to our own, the, quote, orthodox, end quote, Fourth International theory that Russia is still a degenerated workers' state, since, quote, nationalized property equals workers' state, end quote, now requires the conclusion that the East European satellites are likewise, quote, workers' states, end quote. But this means that Stalinism, by no matter what unexpected or unpleasant means, has shown its ability to make the social revolution and overthrow capitalism in favor of a form of workers' power. It means further that while the working class and a revolutionary socialist workers' party is a good thing, and perhaps even necessary for a further healthy development of the, quote, revolution, end quote, they are not necessary for the making of the socialist revolution. It means further that the only role to be played by the Russian Revolutionary Party is as a democratic opposition in or wing of the Stalinist movement. While formally only the British section of the Fourth International has actually acknowledged the conclusion that the satellite countries are worker states, the reaction of the Fourth International to the Tito-Stalin break demonstrates that it is actually tending to assume this character and role of a, quote, left-wing, end quote, or, quote, democratic wing, end quote, of Stalinism. While tradition and pressure from within may slow up or zigzag this trend, it is unquestionably demanded by the theory to which they still cling. If the, quote, workers' state, end quote, position has been well nigh taken out of the realm of theoretical dispute by its refutation in life, the same is even more true of the theory that Russia is essentially capitalist. Whether capitalism heavily overladen by statification or capitalism at its, quote, highest, end quote, peak of development, or the theory that Russia is developing in the direction of capitalism. The destruction of capitalism and of the capitalist class, the refusal of the Stalinist rulers to compromise with it, politically or economically, in the satellite zones, leave no more room for doubt that we have here a social system different from the antagonistic to the capitalist system in any form. Meanwhile, on the negative side, in Russia itself, all predictions of internal Russian development based on either the, quote, worker state or, quote, state capitalist, end quote, theory have utterly failed to show the slightest sign of being realized. In nothing, the confirmation of our analysis of Russia and Stalinism by the events of the past 2 years, in noting the confirmation of our analysis of Russia and Stalinism by the events of the past 2 years, it must not be concluded that the Russian state and social system or the international Stalinist movement is already a finished social formation about which a final set of formulas can be drawn up. Stalinism itself is still meeting new problems as a result of Stalinism's new role in the world, and Stalinism's characteristics are emerging, even to itself, only step by step as it grapples with its new problems. It is only in this sense that we can and do claim that the theory of bureaucratic collectivism has shown itself to be the indispensable key to understanding the Stalinist phenomena. The sweeping character of Stalinist nationalization in Eastern Europe also reinforces another conclusion. It has been traditional in the Marxist analysis of capitalist phenomenon to make or allow a distinction between the, quote, progressive form, end quote, and the, quote, reactionary social content, end quote, of certain capitalist developments, like the growth of monopoly out of large-scale production. The sense in which the term, quote, progressive in form, end quote, was applied to monopoly was contained in the thought that the concentration and centralization of large-scale industrial enterprise in the hands of a few capitalists prepared the way technologically for socialist collectivization, provided in fact the prerequisite for the latter. This was and is correct. It is impossible, however, to apply the same distinction to the bureaucratic nationalization of industry under Stalinism. Stalinist nationalization is in no sense at all a prerequisite for the socialization of the means of production, nor does Stalinist nationalization, quote, prepare the way, end quote, for the socialization of the means of production. Industrialization and centralization in the past represented the impact of what Engels metaphorically called, quote, the invading socialist society, end quote, upon capitalism, developing capitalism to the point where socialism first became possible. Stalinist nationalization and industrialization represent not a necessary preparation for socialism, but an abortion of this pre-socialist evolution, resulting in a social system which is the deadly enemy of socialism. A social system which is the deadly enemy of socialism. The form of nationalized economy per se, as opposed to capitalist property forms, can be characterized only as, quote, potentially more efficient, end quote, and an abstraction which permits a social characterization of actual phenomena only given a live historical context. Stalinist nationalization, therefore, is in no sense progressive, occurring as Stalinist nationalization does at a time when the problem before society on a world scale is no longer that of abolishing the domination of man by nature, sufficient at least for the realization of socialism, but when the problem is that of abolishing the domination of man by man. This is the only basic criterion for the category of, quote, progressiveness, end quote, in today's world that is, quote, progressive, end quote, which is a prerequisite for, or does in fact lead to, the establishment of socialist democracy. New section. The Stalinist road to power and the satellites. The events of the past period have provided also the historical spectacle of new Stalinist states and bureaucracies in the process of formation. Up to the end of the war, bureaucratic collectivism, which was analyzed as a new social formation, different from both capitalism and socialism, as well as from all pre-capitalist societies, as still a Russian phenomenon, limited to one country. An analysis of this new society through this one case was complicated by the fact that in this single specimen, bureaucratic collectivism had arisen through the degeneration of a nationally confined socialist revolution. In the early years of the war, this bureaucratic collectivism in one country already had expanded its own borders through purely military conquests, but had not yet spawned. The bureaucratic collectivist states set up by Stalinism in East Europe did not arise through the degeneration of a socialist revolution in power, nor do they arise in exactly the same way. In the case of Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria, for example, the Stalinist regimes were set up from the beginning of the, quote, liberation, end quote, from the Nazis on the bayonets of the Russian army as pure and simple Quisling regimes, put into power by military ukase and maintained in power by terrorism. If any other road to power was possible in these cases, the Russians at any rate did not experiment with it, although individual bourgeois captives were temporarily utilized as figureheads to ease the transition. These satellites were and are nothing but formally independent satrapies of the Russian power. I think satrapies, I don't know what the best analogy is, like maybe like puppet states or something like that. I think the analogy to Quisling that was made earlier, Quisling was the Nazi supported and supportive government in Norway. Or Quisling is probably actually how you say it. I'd imagine the S is the Z sound, not Quisling. But I've only really read it. I can't remember when the last time I heard someone say Quisling. But anyway. In Czechoslovakia, however, after 5 months of military occupation, the Russians left behind a mixed government in which the Communist Party was handed control over the central institutions of state power, army, police, and of propaganda, but at the same time a certain measure of political power was shared with representatives of the shattered and weakened bourgeoisie who engaged themselves in return to follow the pro-Russian line in international relations. The difference between Czechoslovakia and the first type of satellite was determined essentially not by greater power enjoyed by the Czech bourgeoisie as against the Polish, etc., but by the existence of a proletariat which was the most numerous and the best organized in Eastern Europe. The Czech Communist Party did not dare to move for complete control until in the intervening period. The Czech Communist Party had succeeded in ensuring its rear by subjugating and breaking possible resistance by the working class to complete totalitarianization through a regime of constantly stepped-up terror. In the end, the Stalinist drive to gather all power into their hands achieved success by counting on the passivity of the working class in the face of a coup from above by picked terror squads recruited from the proletariat and used against the proletariat. The passive reaction by the Czech proletariat to the coup was based on the following conditions. A. The essence of state power was already in the hands of the Stalinists as a result of the Russian conquest. The Stalinists were not overthrowing the state power, but merely utilizing the state power to complete the totalitarianization of the country. B. Czechoslovakia's geographical position and common border with Russia, as well as its original military occupation by Russia, had already put it in Moscow's orbit from the beginning, and this objective fact was recognized by all. The coup represented no change in this respect, but only blasted the illusions of the bourgeois politicians and the bourgeois politicians' followers that their country could revolve in Russia's orbit as a maverick planet. C. There was no alternative visible to the workers which did not involve dependence on the totally discredited bourgeoisie, which was clinging to that bourgeoisie's own economic power by a thread, and to the bourgeoisie's political power by sufferance. Like the majority of European workers, the Czech proletariat in the mass looked with hope only to socialism, nor was there left a viable bourgeoisie which could appear even as a practical lesser evil to Stalinism. In such an impasse, the immediate alternatives were only support of the Stalin dictatorship for venal or illusory reasons, or passive toleration and immobilization. The fact, however, that the Stalinist road to total power in Czechoslovakia did not take place completely under Russian guns, but was at least consummated after a semi-public struggle of political forces, permits an insight into another aspect of the nature of Stalinism. The Communist Party apparatus, which came riding in on the Russian army's gun carriages, sought to establish social roots of its own within the country. In the West, e.g. France and Italy, where the Stalinists placed their anti-capitalist face out in front, it is well known that the Stalinist movement has displayed great attractive power for corralling militant and revolutionary elements in the working class who see no other mass party fighting the enemy in power, the capitalist class. In most of Eastern Europe, where the Communist Party leadership was plucked out of Moscow's hotel metropole and placed on top, the consequences are different. Insofar and as long as the Czech Communist Party was still able to use the remnants of the bourgeoisie as a boogeyman, it exercised a gravitational pull on socialist workers. With the tightening of its own reins and the progressive enfeeblement of bourgeois control in the government, its influence over the illusions of the workers and its possession of their active support waned, e.g. victory of the anti-Stalinist wing of the Social Democratic Party over Vierlinger before the coup. And this Vierlinger. Zdeněk Vierlinger, who lived from 1891 to 1976, was a Czechoslovak diplomat and politician. Vierlinger served as the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia from 1944 to 46, first in the London-based Czechoslovak government in exile, and then in liberated Czechoslovakia. Long close to the Soviet Union, Zdeněk Vierlinger has his name often associated with the merger of the Czech Social Democratic Party and the Czechoslovak Communist Party after the Communist coup in 1948. Zdeněk Vierlinger was the uncle of Paul Vierlinger, the famous animator for numerous PBS cartoons. Back to the text. Throughout, in any case, the Stalinists sought and found points of support outside the circle of pro-Stalinist workers with revolutionary illusions, knowing that the latter were unreliable props. The Stalinist bureaucracy in formation seeks to recruit not merely to the ranks of the party, but also specifically to the bureaucracy. In the conditions of the satellite zone, the first recruiting group is the labor and social democratic bureaucracy itself. Already noted is the extent of the ideological kinship between the bureaucracies of reformism and Stalinism, and as the counterweight in the capitalist countries, the different social basis of the reformists and Stalinists. Where, however, capitalism has been well nigh destroyed, or at least seriously enfeebled, on the way out, as in Czechoslovakia, the reformist labor bureaucracy is left rootless, and the reformist labor bureaucracy's habitual ways of thought and life push sections of it to absorption into the Stalinist bureaucracy. Hence the common phenomenon in Eastern Europe today of an influx of social democrat turncoats into the Stalinist apparatus, in some case providing the tops with their only really native elements. A second fertile source of recruitment to the Stalinist bureaucracy under Eastern European conditions is the middle-class intellectual, socially rootless even under declining capitalism, repelled by the anarchy and inefficiency of capitalist society, and capitalist society's inability and unwillingness to give rein to his special talents, even in the capitalist society's own behalf. This type is common, for example, in the leadership of the Yugoslav Communist Party, given the plethora of bureaucratic jobs opened up by Stalinist nationalization, to which must be added a large number of jobs not directly paid by the government, but controlled by the government. Such elements, plus workers, raised into an aristocracy of management, are absorbed into the new Stalinist regimes. To them, in the case of Czechoslovakia, must be added the adaptable elements of the old bureaucracy. Far from requiring a clean sweep of the entire old bureaucracy, even when they take power, the Stalinists have a real need to try to integrate into their own regime as many of the old political figures and office holders as possible. The Czech coup showed that the Stalinist aim is to avoid unleashing the mass action and revolutionary initiative of the workers in their road to power. While as long as remnants of the bourgeoisie remain, they are willing to use gingerly the club of working-class action against them. The Stalinists do not themselves wish to arouse the masses to revolutionary self-activity, to make the masses own Stalinist coup. It would be a mistake to consider that this is due to in any concrete situation only to a calculated fear that the masses may get completely out of hand, though this operates as a strong deterrent where the Communist Party itself has no independent power. In Czechoslovakia, where the Communist Party was already in complete control of the state apparatus of coercion, the awakening of mass revolutionary activity was neither necessary nor desirable for them. In France and Italy, where the Communist Party has several times now led the proletariat to the verge of insurrectionary action in battering ram action against the capitalist government, it has each time drawn back before the danger of revolution could spill over. The Stalinist bureaucracy tends to develop the same mental cast towards action from below that is developed by every reactionary and anti-popular force which is interested in defending its own privileges above all. Just as even in the most democratic capitalist countries, this inherent fear of the masses takes forms not strictly demanded by the actual relationship of forces, but flowing from the nature of the class, e.g. the widespread fear of revolution in the American bourgeoisie in the Depression years of the 1930s. So the Stalinist fear of the masses flows from their anti-working class character. Like the bourgeoisie itself at times, they may be compelled to call on working class action to take the stage to a greater or lesser extent, while seeking to keep it within limits. They can moreover do this all the more freely in proportion as there is no organized working class opposition to crystallize the anti-Stalinist democratic revolutionary forces. In this they follow a course analogous to the bourgeoisie's utilization of proletarian class struggle against feudal power in their time. The Stalinists do not seek their road to power through working class revolution or revolutionary action. The Stalinists seek to utilize class struggle only to support the foreign policy of the Russian state or hasten the process of the breakdown and disintegration of the capitalist framework, to create a chaotic vacuum into which they can step from above. Their adventuristic sabotage strikes in France and Italy play the short-term game of pressure for a pro-Russian appeasement policy and serve the longer-range aim of creating the conditions under which Stalinism wishes to take power without the revolutionary intervention of the masses. In France and Italy, these conditions are not near, and neither, therefore, is Stalinist power on the Atlantic. The victory of Stalinism in Western Europe, which would mean the longest step toward world Stalinist domination, is abstractly as a possibility, but it can be posed as a possibility only given at an extreme stage of disintegration of Western capitalism, such as was true in the East as a result of the Second World War, and such as creates a near vacuum of political and social power. But this abstract possibility has already been sufficiently expressed in the very enunciation of the historic alternatives of socialism or barbarism. Not abstractly, but in terms of the real-world situation, long before such a stage can be expected, war between Russia and the Western capitalist world and the revival of the movement for proletarian revolution will first have settled the question of the fate of capitalism. The last word is still to be said by the working class. The outcome is not to be deduced from abstract analyses, but will be determined by the struggle itself. New section. The line of struggle against Stalinism. The first steps required are the beginnings of mass struggle for the simplest economic demands on wages, vacations, working day, police regime in the factories, etc. The flowering of Russian imperialism and the consequent necessity of shaping the whole economy toward a permanent war footing, added to the enormous waste inherent in a bureaucratic collectivist economy, makes it impossible for the regime to allow an improvement in the standard of living of the masses. But under bureaucratic collectivism, there are not and cannot be any purely economic struggles. The struggles of the simplest economic demand is by definition, the struggle for the simplest economic demand is by definition from the beginning a struggle against the totalitarian state, a political struggle. Similarly, every struggle against the, quote, excesses, end quote, of the police regime is a struggle for workers' democracy, for control of the nationalized economy by the people. But under bureaucratic collectivism, the struggle for control of the nationalized economy by the people, the struggle for workers' democracy, is necessarily the struggle for socialism. Where the state already owns and controls the economy, every struggle over the state power becomes a struggle for the democratic rule of the working class, as against the bureaucracy. In the Stalinist states, the ruling class, and therefore the main enemy, is the bureaucracy. There is no big bourgeoisie at all, this class having been completely destroyed in all of the Russian satellites. There are remnants of the small and middle bourgeoisie in some sectors of the economy, shorn of all political power, and tightly controlled by the Stalinist state. Even those socially powerless remnants are progressively being cut down by advancing statification and control. All responsibility for both economic and political life is centered in the hands of the Stalinist state, which necessarily is the focal point on which all movements of discontent and opposition converge. The aim of all opposition in such a state inevitably centers around the demands of democracy. Not only is this demand the essence of the socialist struggle under the bureaucratic collectivist regime, it is at the same time the program around which the widest strata of the population can be effectively mobilized. Even in the case of the peasants, the only important social force remaining in the Stalinist satellite still based on private property, the socialist program, which advocates truly voluntary collectivization founded on education, supports the struggle of the small peasants against the despotism that deprives them of the land on the basis of a, quote, collectivization, end quote, which scarcely conceals the fact that the peasants are reduced to state serfs of the land, exploited and lorded over by the government police. Such a program is a powerful weapon capable of drawing the peasantry around the anti-Stalinist workers in opposition to the agrarian policies of a totalitarian state based on terrorism and enslavement to the state. The task of the Marxists, therefore, is to enter into battle against the main enemy alongside every genuinely popular movement of resistance to the despotism of the state. Marxists will seek to organize the class forces of the working class independently in such a struggle, raise their own class banners, and achieve working class hegemony over this democratic struggle, along with whatever bourgeois elements are involved in the fight or even temporarily at its head. The struggle of the Marxist and of the working class in such a popular democratic camp is in no sense a struggle for, quote, bourgeois restoration, end quote, but on the contrary, the only way in which bourgeois restoration can be fought as an alternative to Stalinism and the broad masses led in a socialist direction. The threat of bourgeois restorationist movement in Eastern Europe looms, however, in proportion as disillusionment with the Stalinist regime finds no revolutionary alternative through which it can be channelized, and in proportion to pressure by Western capitalism. Given the largely agrarian character of many of the Russian satellites and the presently atomized state of its working class, the revitalization of working class revolt against Stalinism, the seeds of which revolt are sown by Stalinism itself, may require first a series of demonstrations in the West. Insofar as the Western proletariat shows that the power of Stalinism can be broken in their own countries, insofar as the Western proletariat prove that Stalinist power is not fated to roll over Europe's working class, insofar as they exhibit in struggle a non-capitalist alternative to Stalinist totalitarianism, to this extent the revolt of the East European peoples will be speeded, the East European people's self-confidence raised, and the situation created there whereby they can take advantage of the cracks in the Stalinist structure and push through these fissures in a wave of assaults upon the Stalinist power. This demonstration, however, cannot be made as long as the working class of the West channelizes the fight against Stalinism through support of capitalism. The overthrow of Stalinism in the East requires the revolutionary struggle to overthrow capitalism in the West. This political approach to the problem of fighting Stalinism is even more important in the West, where the Stalinist movements are still followed by large sections of the working class. During the past 2 years, there has been a marked decline in Stalinist influence from the post-war high point in almost every country in Europe. This decline is due partly to the masses' experience with Stalinist policy, both in the West and in the East, and partly to the Marshall Plan offensive of American capitalism. Neither the Marshall Plan nor the prospect of temporary economic improvement has, however, convinced the Western European workers that the restabilization of capitalism under American domination offers an alternative worth fighting for enthusiastically as against Stalinism. The chief reason why the Stalinists still remain the strongest party supported by the working class, in spite of their own crimes and progressive disillusionment with them, is the fact that they appear as fighters against capitalism and for peace. That's in italics, so I'm going to read it again. The chief reason why the Stalinists still remain the strongest party supported by the working class, in spite of their own crimes and progressive disillusionment with them, is the fact that the Stalinists appear as fighters against capitalism and for peace. Any movement which follows the policy of supporting capitalism as against Stalinism or supporting American imperialism as against Russian deprives itself of the possibility of winning these masses away from the Stalinist and for a progressive movement. At the best, given sufficient self-exposure by the latter, the masses will be left without any alternative for which they are ready to fight devotedly and actively. This sine qua non for breaking the workers away from Stalinist leadership is the regroupment of the scattered forces with a revolutionary third camp position and the making of a new beginning in forging a new instrument for the mobilization of the proletariat against both capitalism and Stalinism. Sorry, I had a thought to myself. The only mass party of the working class in existence in Western Europe is the social democracy, which bases itself on the, quote, lesser evil, end quote, policy. While it is the only movement which appears before militant workers as an alternative to following the Stalinists, the reformist pro-American and pro-bourgeois democratic character of its line and leadership is an inseparable obstacle to its effectively playing the role of bulwark against Stalinism within the working class. Nevertheless, in most places, given the feeble state of the independent Marxist movement, the rise of a Marxist third camp wing within the social democratic movements offers the best support for setting up a pole of attraction for the disillusioned Stalinist workers, as well as for leftward moving socialists, and thus contributing toward the regroupment of forces from the existing working class movement. Such a new beginning is the first task in Europe and America today. In most of the world, and above all in Europe, it is no longer enough for working class revolutionists to chart the lines of class struggle against capitalism in the assurance that every blow struck against capitalism is a blow for the socialist future. They face two enemies, a capitalism which is anti-Stalinist and a Stalinism which is anti-capitalist. I'm going to repeat that. They face two enemies, a capitalism which is anti-Stalinist and a Stalinism which is anti-capitalist. This three-cornered struggle for power was implicit in the Czech events, and it is the utterly new constellation of social forces which disorients and confuses the working class movement. It is the recognition of this new stage which is the basis of the politics of the third camp. Without the working class struggle, no socialism. This is truer than ever before. What is not true is that mere anti-capitalist struggle automatically equals socialist struggle. This is such an important fucking statement. What is not true is that mere anti-capitalist struggle automatically equals socialist struggle. The conscious planned intervention and leadership of a revolutionary Marxist vanguard, anti-capitalist and anti-Stalinist, which has not been poisoned at its source by a false conception of the relation between socialism and workers' democracy, is more than ever the key to a socialist victory. The end. It's been... Sorry, let me get back to the beginning so I can read the title. It's in the book as a different title than what the original piece is. The piece in the book is called "The New Russian Empire," and what it's originally from is New International, April 1949, Stalinism and the Rise of the New Russian Empire, a Workers' Party document written by Draper.